12th June 1972, Stockholm played host to the first ever United Nations Conference on the Human Environment. 5 decades later, the 50th anniversary of this event took place under the name Stockholm+50. We joined Dr. Bremley Lyngdoh on his visit to Stockholm to get an insight into what was going on outside the conference itself and to speak to local and international young people to get their thoughts on that historic conference and what has happened since.
The UN hosted the first ever conference on environmental security back in June 1972, and they chose Stockholm because that was the year they actually laid the foundations for the United Nations Environment Program, which is a program of the United Nations based out of Nairobi in Kenya, and it's a specialized agency of the United Nations that's focused predominantly in protecting the environment and the ecosystems on planet Earth. Back in 1972, heads of states gathered in Stockholm, including Prime Minister Indira Gandhi from India, to affirm their commitment that there was a serious problem with the planet. Back then, I think just some war had just finished, right, in Vietnam, early 70s. A big push by a lot of young people then to focus on healing and reconciliation of the war, and member states of the UN focused on having this UN conference in Sweden.
Stockholm, Sweden, June 12, 1972. Mrs. Indira Gandhi, Prime Minister of India, arrived today to address the first United Nations Conference on the Human Environment. She was met by the Secretary General of the conference, Mr. Maurice Strong, who escorted Mrs. Gandhi to the rostrum.
And this year, we celebrated 50 years since that conference was hosted by the government of Sweden, and a lot of governments were in Stockholm, again reaffirming what they did or made commitments 50 years ago. It was quite interesting to see that in the tapes 50 years ago, it's the same kind of lingo, the same kind of body language that politicians carried themselves on promise the next generation 50 years ago, and they're still doing the same thing now.
It's almost scary, like when you watch the old interviews, like the archive footage from 1972 of the first, the original meeting here. The messages are almost exactly the same, and the urgency is the same, and like when you see those interviews and realize that nothing's been happening for 50 years and they're still saying the exact same things, that's really worrying, actually.
So, having spoken to youth activists like Greta herself, who was there, she told me that, look, nothing has changed. It's just a facade of these political leaders trying to covering up for things they haven't done and making promises again. But as you know, politicians are elected for a term of 4 or 5 years, and then they try to emulate and make promise to their constituents wherever they are that they are making a commitment. But before you know it, they're out of office and another government comes to power, and they don't honor what the previous government had committed to, even at a global scale. So it's like playing ping pong ball with the lives of future generations. Imagine 50 years, a lot could have been done. But as we all know it, we are worse off right now. The planet is much, much worse off than what it was back in 1972. And now here we are sitting on this tree. It's 2022. So I could feel the anxiety, I could feel the anger, I could feel the stress of all the young people, especially those in their teenage, walking in the streets of Stockholm, with a big march organized by Fridays for Future with Greta, and it was quite amazing that so many grandparents also turn out.
And there's another organization called Grandparents for the Future, right?
Grandparents for the Future, yeah, they were marching behind the young people, chanting, singing their songs right through the city center of Stockholm. It was all beautiful, it was very peaceful, but I think there was much more happening in the streets of Stockholm rather than in the actual negotiations. So I spent a lot of my time with the young people in the streets, getting to know them and what they want from the political leaders. And we finally ended our big march, a climate march in the main square, and there were young people speaking out. So the grandparents I spoke to are scared for the future of their grandchildren, and that's why they are marching with them in solidarity from the back. And here we have an intergenerational march of communities from around the world showing solidarity of what they care about and what they want to show to the world, that business as usual cannot continue, and the people need to take action wherever they live, in every city around the world, and march and also take individual action while holding their elected officials accountable. Some of them are in their 70s, so they know what happened 50 years ago, because they were teenagers or in their 20s, and they're quite worried because they are grandparents now, and they remember very clearly of the promises made by their governments then, but nothing much has followed through. It's still the same old. As a matter of fact, things are going much worse off. And a lot of young people and indigenous youth actually did not get their visas.
Wow.
So here we are talking about their future, but we are not allowing them to come to the stage at the United Nations conference. I mean, that's quite unfair. And a lot of the young people who made it actually got out of the actual conference and were in the streets in solidarity with all the other youth, indigenous youth, people from the Caribbean, people from Africa, those are the lucky ones that made it, and holding the officials and the politicians accountable from the streets. I had the chance of actually also talking to the actual citizens and young people of Stockholm, of what they felt about their city hosting this important UN conference, taking stock of what happened 50 years ago. And it was very interesting to hear some of their inputs.
Okay, well, let's take a look at what they have to say.
Absolutely. What is your message here to the world?
Well, I mean, this is who we're protecting, right? The diversity of species and like the ISIS, we have stopped them from melting. So we're here today to also be here with
the animals
one
need
of
to be
those.
represented too.
Yeah.
Like we're not only messing it up for ourselves, but also for everybody else, like all other species.
Yeah.
I think young people should do stuff like this, gather and show the people in charge that we are serious. We need change now, because like change needs to come from above, I think. So one way to take action is to actually show politicians that you need to do something too.
In order to really, set a sparkle among young people and among everyone, in order to so they also mobilize and get into protest and start talking about this issue that we all have to talk about and learn and solve. And in order to work good with each other, we have to know each other. So we have to, really meet and talk and do different things together, so we really know each other, and then we can communicate better, and then we can work better, and then we can achieve something that is better for tomorrow. You have to stop cutting down the trees and the forest. We have to really restore the what we've destroyed. We have to stop using being dependent on fossil fuels, because it's not working, it's not sustainable. We have to really take care of our biodiversity. We have to eat healthier, and we have to take care of each other. We have to communicate, and we have to build relationships, and we have to be kinder to each other and nicer to each other, and that's what they should have done 50 years ago, because then we would have solved this problem already.
We're gonna face this crisis now. The truth is, I came here representing indigenous peoples from Northeast India. We had 1,000 consultations on the ground, and we came with the hope that things would be different this time. But the truth is, it's not going to be different. That's why I'm here out protesting with the climate march instead of being in the conference, because inside it's the same old story. It's a lot of talk and not a lot of action. We are here to ask for action, and this is why I'm here at the climate march, and I'm going to go back and give the same message over there.
So what would you do if you were the Minister of Environment? What laws would you change immediately? Suppose you are.
Well, I wouldn't want to.
Wait. Yeah.
We need to have those kinds of discussions as they're having up there in the conferences, because they're hella organized. We also need to get organized. We need to get organized in schools around the world. We need to get organized in workplaces around the world. We need to get organized on the streets around the world and make sure that we know how to put forward the best fight possible. Our planet is under attack!
In a world where money is more valuable than people, where oil gets to determine whether we survive or go extinct, where the suffering of Black, Brown, and Indigenous folk is treated as inconsequential, a conference sponsored by the fossil fuel industry is not just a mockery of the science, it is a direct attack on all of us.